Hi everyone, welcome to NCARB Live. My name is Caroline Massey and I'm an assistant editor at Architect Magazine. Today I'm joined by Lori Apfel-Cardelli, Nicole Dasso, and Christine Harding. Today we'll be discussing women in architecture, which is a topic that will be featured in Architect Magazine's April issue. Specifically, we'll be discussing how to navigate firm culture, how to address wage disparities, and how to prepare for meetings on the job site. At the end, we'll have time to answer your questions, so feel free to submit them using the Q&A tool on your screen. So to start things off, how about you tell me a little bit about yourselves and why you decided to pursue architecture. Lori, should we start with you?
Sure. So my name is Lori Apfel-Cardelli. I am a senior project architect at Bowers Design Build in McLean, Virginia. I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with a Bachelor of Science in Architecture and from Columbia University with my MArch. Why I wanted to be an architect. So since I was little, my parents used to always drag my sister and I to every open house to go look at, what they thought would be a better, flow or layout or something, to get us ready to move. And then something would just, not be right, and in the end, we would still be in our house. So I think just the frustration of having to be dragged out all the time, I just wanted to design the perfect house so they would just stop taking us. So, and sure enough, today I am doing custom residential work, which is why I wanted to be an architect. So.
Great. Nicole?
I'm Nicole Dasso. I am a technical director at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. I'm also a graduate of the School of Architecture at Syracuse University. I chose to study architecture. When I was actually a student in high school, I was studying Latin, and I was influenced by the Roman architecture that we studied. And also coming from New York, I was just inspired by the great New York City icons and decided to become an architect.
I'm Christine Harding. I'm Vice President of the KPS Group in Huntsville, Alabama. I graduated from Rice University, and I go all the way back to high school where I took architectural drafting and got very interested in the profession at that time. My parents always had a little piece of property that they were going to be designing a house for, and so my mom always had some graph paper. So I started early on really appreciating the profession and wanted to be an architect.
Over your careers, have you noticed any shifts in firm culture? Lori, should we start with you?
Sure. I think one of the greatest shifts that has happened, even the last few years, has been technologically based. I think that, the ability to connect with architects who are working overseas or, working from home and logging in to work in, elsewhere besides physically in the office has, expanded our horizons a lot. I think that, with BIM and Revit and now, with sustainability and there's always a, consultant or somebody else who's kind of participating in the process. So I think that, the expanse of what is existing now is much greater than it was, even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree. I think technology is probably the largest factor that is allowing us to work globally, as well as, with consultants all over the world and with clients all over the world.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also has a real drain on our time. We're almost expected to be working around the clock, and I think we have to be, especially as parents and mothers, we have to be careful about what our personal boundaries are in terms of that.
Would you say any of you have struggled with the work-life balance?
I don't know if struggle is necessarily the right term, but been challenged by it. Yes, I have an 18-month-old at home, and I think that, for me, I always wanted to go back to work. I think that, this is a profession that requires a lot of time and a lot of time to get your license, and something that I've always wanted to do. But I think that, having to create boundaries and other things to be able to take care of my son or afford to take care of my son, is very important. I think that, I have to be reminded many times when I go home to put my phone in the other room and not check my email, although my son has gotten very good about trying to check my email on my iPhone. So I think just remembering that, but I agree. I mean, I think it's almost like being a doctor. You're required to be on call in a way in case, we're in I guess we're in an age where, waiting 10 minutes for an email is like almost too long, like instantaneous gratification. And I think sometimes we need to take a step back and realize that there are other priorities and other things that we need to factor in.
I mean, I think, it's a difficult profession in that it's, it's complex, and that, it's not like a job where, things add up, or it's simple and there's simple answers. And, I think it's very important not to allow yourself to kind of get caught up in it, because, you could just keep working on the same detail over and over and over. And I think it's very important to, kind of set limits, and to make sure that your priorities, that are things that are important to you, that you're allowing yourself the time to have a balanced life.
As I used to always say that when my children were growing up, that Tuesdays and Thursdays were my night, that I just would not schedule anything. We've done a lot of church work, and as many of you can imagine, that doing church work, they also have full-time jobs, and so they can only work, or they can only meet in their committees after work. So I think that just setting those boundaries and making sure that you give time to your family, and just finding the right balance is important.
So let's talk about meetings on the job sites. How do you prepare for those? What do you wear, and how do you present yourself?
I think many of us talked about that early on in our careers. Our struggle was just our limit of our experience at that time. And so I think, Nicole, you mentioned that it's important that you really do some research, understand the issue that you're going to be preparing for. Also, engage with the contractor when you're on the job site. They're a skilled worker. They're there because they've done that for many years. But I think that research and any sort of preparation you can before you go to the job site is important.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you're saying about being prepared, I mean, I had, in the early starts of my career, I've spent a lot of time over my career working on site. And in the earlier years of my career, being out in the job site very early on, there were definitely some challenges with being out there. I learned to make sure I had the right hard hat, right boots, and, really made sure that I was dressed professionally for a construction site. And, make sure that, you appreciated and listened very carefully to what the contractors were saying, and understood that they had been doing whatever that is that they were doing. If you're talking to a concrete contractor, they maybe have been pouring concrete for 30 years. And just to, listen to them, take note, and really prepare. I think that, over the years, my comfort zone really became making sure that I asked in advance, like what types of questions, or try to anticipate what types of questions I might be asked on the job site, reviewed the drawings in advance, and then come to the field almost with a way of having an answer already sort of predetermined in my head. And I found that really helped in, gaining the respect that I think that I deserved out in the field.
And I think it's also important to remember too, whether you're a man, a woman, whoever it is on the job site, that, everybody's working towards the same goal, towards the same end result. And so, for the same way that you would ask your coworker how their weekend was, or, ask them if they watched the latest episode of Homeland or something, like there's no reason why you can't address the contractors in the same way. Are you involved in a fantasy football team? Know a little bit about the NCAA tournament. Just, something that relates to them, so you have something to talk about, that shows that you're interested in them on a personal level. Because, they, in many ways, will become your best friend throughout this process. And as Nicole said, remember, they have been doing their specific trade for a lot longer than you've probably been working. And so, if they have a way that they know is going to work, let them teach you. So the next time you're on a job site, you can have a more productive conversation. So I think just remembering that everybody is on the same team is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Have any of you ever experienced negativity at the job site, and how did you handle it?
So my negativity was actually nothing to do with being a woman. It had to do with the fact that I look a lot younger than I am. and I was on a job site meeting a contractor for one of the first times, and we were not having an argument, but having a heated discussion about something that, he felt he was right about, and I knew I was right about. And and he basically told me in a meeting with probably 8 or 10 people around the table that I just didn't have enough experience to make that decision. And I kind of took a step back. I didn't I didn't internalize it too much, but afterwards I did approach him and, kind of said to him, like, what do you mean I don't have enough experience? I have been working for X many years. And he said to me, he's like, I thought you were like right out of undergrad. Like, I didn't, you look a lot younger. I had no idea. And after that point, he was my biggest advocate on the site. He kind of took me under his wing, and he taught me a lot of stuff about things I didn't know. And I think it was just approaching that with him, making him realize that maybe I wasn't, his daughter at home that, was right out of high school. I think it helped the situation a lot.
Well, I would say it's excellent to be able to address that with just don't let it linger, confront the person, not, just respectfully, just so that you can kind of understand where the negativity was coming from. But I think that even if there was, 10 women on a job site, we have to understand that women in that environment are going to be very different. And being from the South, there are a lot of smaller projects and smaller job sites where you may not even know the contractor because it might have been a competitively bid project. So I think it's important to just, hit that head on, don't let it linger, and just, in a respectful way, have a discussion about kind of how you took the negativity.
How could you assert yourself as a person in a position of power without offending your colleagues or clients? Lori, maybe going back to your experience, how could you have, asserted your expertise in the topic?
I think taking a step back, it's always important to remember that, I've always said, like, in a managerial type role, in a project management type role, the best project managers are not necessarily somebody who has all of the answers. It's somebody who knows where to get all of those answers. So I think, humility is a funny thing where I think sometimes if you can acknowledge you may not, know everything or, want to be taught a better way to do something, I'm not sure coming in and just demanding that you're in charge and they're sitting there building your project is the right relationship. I think it's, forming that relationship that's going to give you that project management role. And it may take some time, and it may take, a different project or another project or a year from now. But I think just, cultivating those relationships, I think you'll start to see kind of, what your role becomes versus what their role is.
I think you have to earn people's respect.
Right.
It's like the biggest thing. And, I think, being professional, being prepared, this will come up over and over again, I think, throughout the questions today. But, being familiar with your job and just sort of, making sure that you can command if you're in a meeting, that you've come prepared, you've come organized, you've got an agenda, and that you command sort of the meeting, if that's what your role is to be. And then, again, if you're out on the job site, you're commanding what it is that you're there to be reviewing.
And I was going to say, just, knowledge gives you confidence. And if you can exude the confidence in what you know about that you're talking about, that's going to probably be your best way to assert yourself.
And also follow up and follow through. If you're telling them that you don't know the answer to something, but you'll find out as quickly as possible. Be responsive, be there, answer questions, because I think, the respect that you're trying to earn will quickly dwindle if, you just say, oh yeah, sure, I'll take care of it, and then you disappear for a week. So I think accountability also helps that situation. Let somebody be able to rely on you.
What would you do if a contractor kept deferring to your male colleagues?
Well, I think I I might try to actually talk to one of my male colleagues, and if I was in that situation, and maybe talk to them and have them, maybe not respond, and maybe you could deal it with them and say, the next time that they sort of address you and really it's a question for me to respond to, say, Lori, why don't you respond to this? And maybe that's a way that you could kind of work it back into the conversation where you're not sort of then approaching, maybe if it's your client who's not directing you, it may not be the best thing to say something to your client, but maybe you could sort of work it around another way and have it deal with it with your colleague.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's great.
So at Architect, we recently posted some data from the U.S. Census Bureau that female architects are paid 80% of what male architects earned in 2013. So I'd just like to talk about wage equality for a couple minutes. How can you gauge if you're being compensated fairly at your firm?
I think within your firm, it's a little bit difficult sometimes. I mean, I know myself included, I have never felt comfortable in talking to other colleagues about how much money that they were making. I think maybe what I would advise is that, to try to do a little bit of research amongst your colleagues that are in comparable firms, or, your people that maybe you went to school with. I think that you have to kind of a little bit try to compare it to, similar size firms, similar locations, similar scales of work. And try to gauge a little bit about, what other people might be making in the industry. I think it's also really important that, people not be afraid to ask for salary increases. I know myself included, I often felt like, that it was not maybe appropriate to ask, or, I was hesitant to ask about, raises that I felt that I deserved. And I think that what I would encourage people to do is that, find a time within your workspace that, I don't know if there may be annual reviews that might be an appropriate time, or after maybe a large phase of a project, and you can speak to your superiors after you've done some research, and, come to them and approach them about, asking for a raise that you feel that has been merited. I think the thing that we must always remember is that the worst thing that can happen is that someone will say no. And so I think that you should be comfortable asking at appropriate times.
I think we all work in firms where there's a very structured employment manual, that we know that there's going to be an annual employee review, and that there are some levels that you work towards in terms of salary. But if you are in a firm and you don't have that in place, I think this is a good time where you could actually find somebody, a mentor outside of the firm, and find out what sort of manual they have in terms of just setting an outline, and offer to maybe work on that, offer to kind of create that. And I think that that's something that everybody should have in place within a firm, is that there is a path that what you're aspiring to, and also some salary levels within that.
And I think showing the initiative to do that, if you're not in a firm that already has something in place, already sets you ahead, maybe even from your colleagues. So I definitely think it's important for your own professional growth to get feedback. Constructive criticism can help tremendously. It can even also, for instance, if you're doing an IDP program, remind your supervisor or your boss, like, hey, I want to get my license, but I still have this many hours left. Can we have a conversation about it? So I think there's a lot of things that can kind of piece together through that.
And in our conversation earlier, Lori, you brought up how you have to compare, what different firms are offering you in terms of benefit packages.
Right.
What would you advise young architects to consider?
So I think a lot of times, especially if you're right out of school, or maybe you've only worked at one firm, a lot of young professionals don't necessarily realize that when you're talking about a base salary, it can also include a lot of other things that contribute to that. For example, let's say, and I am completely making this up, but let's say you're making $40,000 a year out of your first job. Some firms offer health insurance. Some firms pay for your health insurance. That alone could be another $5,000 a year in benefits. Some will pay AIA fees. Some will pay for your exams. Some will pay your NCARB renewal fees. Others contribute to a 401k package. Some firms offer 10 days of vacation, others offer 15 days of vacation. So when you add up the monetary value of all those other, bennies, like my dad always calls like benefits, one firm that may have a slightly lower salary, offer sheet may actually be the better offer, because compared to a firm that's not offering any of these things. So I think, right out of school and first few jobs, it's hard to, it's hard to understand why it's so important to contribute to a 401k retirement package. But I think once you're in the working world for a while, you'll be very thankful that you considered that. So I just think, those are all questions to ask. And with that said, maybe you do want an extra $5,000 in salary. Maybe the firm will give you an extra 2 days off as opposed to the other. So I think there are ways to negotiate those types of things where maybe that benefit will outweigh the salary discrepancy.
So do your research and ask questions.
Yes.
So studies have shown that women are less likely to negotiate for a higher salary than men. When is it appropriate to negotiate for higher pay with your employer, and how would you suggest doing so?
I think we spoke about it a little bit before. I mean, I think, if there is a setup where there's an annual review, that's ideally the right time. I think that, during that time, I would also, not just talk about my salary increase that I really want. I would also talk about, what my goals are, because I think employers want to hear from you about what each individual's goal is, and, whether or not that's pertaining just to some job that they might want to work on, or, where they are with their license. But I think that that's an appropriate time. I think after, like we spoke earlier about, either maybe at a completion of a job or at a major phase. But again, it's very important to come prepared to the table with, having done some research, and it can't just be about, I would like a raise. It's got to have some kind of weight and merit behind it.
I think you had mentioned too that, if you have just finished a part of a project and you've been and you felt that you did a really good job and things were successful with it, and I think that's a good time to go and negotiate, because then there's a positive spin on where you're coming from in terms of asking for that. And I think too that if you are looking at changing jobs, the most important time for you to negotiate, at least a place to start, is when you have changed a job, and then you set the base for where you start.
Yeah, that's very good advice.
Would you suggest giving a range for your salary, or coming in and...
I typically, I haven't applied for a job in a very long time, but I know that, when asked these kinds of questions before, even when I'm negotiating, I typically try not to put a number out there, like, oh, I've done my research, know where I would like to land. But I typically don't put a number out there, because I'm always just very curious to see where their offer might be, so that you're not shortchanging yourself. But I think it's important to go in with a number that, in your mind at least, that you would like.
And put it back on them. Tell them, what is somebody in my situation with my background, my skills, and my experience, what is the value to you at your firm? And have them put a number on that. And if they then throw it back at you, figure something out.
You're not going to get anything.
Right.
I think one place to research is Design Intelligence that will tell you what to expect in the region, and that's important to use that as a tool.
Okay. So now we have time to answer a few of your questions. Remember that you can submit them using the Q&A tool on your screen. So we have a question from Leah. Leah asks, have you ever had any conversations about gender inequalities in the workplace with your male colleagues? And if so, what was the result?
I really haven't. I've also been in a situation where I've actually worked for 3 women-owned firms. So for me, I guess I haven't experienced a gender issue per se, maybe because it's been more in my face because of the situation, but
I think more so what I've probably experienced is being in a meeting and sensing that when I was there with a male colleague that the client or whomever was talking to us was deferring to him, and that goes back to what you had said. So we just have conversations afterwards of how to maybe kind of steer the question or steer it back towards towards me as the one that was actually working on that part of the project, for instance. Those are some of the conversations we've had internally in the firm.
Our next question is from April. I am a senior in high school and will be attending Texas A&M University next fall. Congratulations to April.
Giga Maggie.
What obstacles, if any, did you have to overcome as a female architecture student?
Wow. Well, I can say that when I started architecture school, the percentage was very low. I'm glad to hear that today the numbers are greatly up, and what I understand it's about 50-50. But certainly, when I was a student back in the early 90s, there was definitely an inequality. There was probably maybe 1 to 5, if that, and I think the percentages at graduation were probably even lower. Certainly when I started in the market, that was also very predominant, that it was very much a male-driven environment. But I think you do find, I think you have to network. I think that was the big thing. Like immediately when I was a student, there was another young woman who ended up being one of my closest friends all through college, and she immediately gravitated towards me. And second semester, first day, she's like waving me down that she had saved a seat for me, and I was like, okay, But I think that's what you kind of need to do is like network within the community, within your architecture program, and then subsequently at work.
Yeah. And I think also just be proactive. Knowing that you want to be an architect. A lot of people go to college and they don't even know what they want to do. And I think our profession is unique in a way because most of us who become architects have wanted to be an architect for a very long time. So I think just being proactive and knowing what steps you need to do to get your license or get a job, I think will already set you apart from even other female, colleagues in schools. So I think, to Nicole's point, it's definitely 50-50 now. And in some cases, I actually think my undergrad was a little bit more female women. So I don't know if that divide is so prevalent anymore.
I would say that one of the things I would recommend is now that we can get IDP experience with a high school diploma, immediately go out there and try to find a summer job or a summer internship, and that's where you may find as just kind of your first experience of what it means to be a woman in the architecture program and what those job opportunities are. What are your resources? Is it back home if you're home over the summer, or is it in College Station where you're going to be going to school? But I would really encourage to do that early on and get your experience.
Our next question is from Lindsay. Lindsay asks, does the lack of confidence go away over the years? I'm 3 years out of school and often feel like I don't have answers when I go to construction meetings.
I think, again, we've kind of like circled through this a little bit, but I think a lot of that is about being prepared. I myself experienced it early on in my profession, being out in a construction site, and again, talking to contractors who have done this for so long, and I had a larger picture of the bigger vision. But if you're talking to a specific trade that has done something, who for the last 30 years, of course he's going to know more than you. So I think trying to be prepared, go through the documents, understand the details of what you've drawn, and then really trying to sort of command the conversation and really trying to come with solutions. And I think that it may not happen instantaneously, but I think over a period of time that you work with them, they'll see your confidence and appreciate that and give you the respect that you deserve.
And don't be embarrassed or afraid to ask a contractor a question. I think that, you sit usually in an office every day looking at Revit or AutoCAD, like drawing things in 3D but in 2D. I think actually being on the job site and seeing how, a brick veneer wall actually looks when, all the pieces are together, I think just opens your world up tremendously. And so I think, spend an extra half an hour at the end of the day with the contractor on the job site, maybe you can't bill that half an hour to your client, but if the contractor is willing to do that, take advantage of it. Something else that old boss used to do for me is he would give me sets of completed projects, like drawing sets, and just tell me to just, review them and look at them. And that way, you can kind of see what had been done previously and apply that to your project. So I think a lot will come with experience, but just don't be afraid to say you don't know something.
I think that's actually really good advice, to ask questions and engage people in that conversation.
Yeah. Right. This is a lifelong learning profession, and even at my advanced age from you all, that every day there's something new, especially if you tackle a new project type that you haven't been experienced in, and even if you're trying to kind of push the envelope in design, you're going to have to explore new ways of how to do those details. And so just accept the fact that we're going to be learning the rest of our professional career.
And going back to your point about continuing education, even if you're not licensed yet, there's no reason why you can't go to a CEU seminar and learn about these things. I mean, we were even talking recently in our office, like the amount of things that are changing with LEDs, with lights, just the technology and everything. I mean, it's hard to find anybody except somebody who's, particularly dealing with that, technology, like at Lutron or something, that knows about it. And so I think we're all continuing to learn new things, which is what makes our buildings better and better over time.
You're not always going to have the answers, like you said earlier. Say you're going to find the answer and then go do it and bring it back.
Right.
So our next question is from Annette. She asks, how should we respond when jokes about women are made in the workplace?
Well, it's kind of like we were talking about, if you get a cat call on a job site, or jokes about women. I think the first thing I'd say is ignore it, don't react. Don't let them see that it bothered you, but then maybe take that person aside later on and just let them know in a respectful way that you didn't appreciate that joke. And and I think that we're not in control of how other people act. We're only in control of how we act. So how we react is going to say a lot about ourselves. So I think that just ignore it to start with, but not necessarily ignore it, but follow up with that person.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's really that bad, it's something that I would approach like an HR with at that point if it continues on. But I would I would at first approach try to deal with it myself, like with the individual directly.
And also just remember, to not take things too personally. Not to say that is acceptable under any terms, but you don't know what's going on in that person's personal life. It may not really be directed to you, and this goes beyond just a comment about a woman. So I think just also kind of taking a step back before you address the situation too, so that way you're taking care of it in an appropriate manner regardless of what came in the other direction.
Our next question is from Michelle. What is a good way to ask someone to be your mentor? Because we said that having a mentor is crucial. So how would you ask someone?
I think the first thing you do is maybe say that maybe give them a call and just say that you'd like to set up a chance to go to coffee with them, and just let them know that you'd like to get to know them a little bit better, and over coffee or something very casual, just begin to find out if it is somebody that you want to have mentor you, but then to just ask them, just let them know the things that you're maybe struggling with in terms of your the experience that you're not getting, and just see if they even have time. Maybe be respectful that that you're asking for their time, and maybe even just say, I just would care to just be able to email you once a month, or maybe I'm thinking that we could have coffee again in a couple weeks or something like that.
Yeah, I think you try to come up with a plan, because it's likely that everyone will be very busy. I think someone mentioned it earlier, Lori. I think it was you, that about looking out and trying to figure out, maybe reaching out to a professor or somebody from another office. And I think that the mentor or mentorship can take on many different forms.
Right. I to that point, I think, you got to remember, too, that for the same way that we don't know everything about everything, your mentor is not necessarily going to know everything about everything. And so, is it that you have 3 really close mentors, somebody from school, a professor, maybe somebody in an office, and maybe a contemporary who just has a different, maybe they've taken 3 more exams that you have and can offer some advice about that situation. So I think, remembering, picking and choosing we kind of call it like a circle of mentors, because you wouldn't necessarily go to, I don't know, like if you had a question about a recipe in a book, you'd probably call somebody who knows a little bit about cooking. So it's like if you have a question about concrete on a job site, maybe you would, form a relationship with your concrete contractor. If you have questions about Revit, you probably would go to somebody in your office who maybe knows a little more technical stuff. So I don't think there's anything wrong with combining that. And also, too, just do you talk to this person once a week, once a month, every 6 months? I mean, I'm still in touch with my first boss when I was interning in high school. And, we don't talk every day, but when we do, it's like nothing changed. And he's able to offer me certain advice. So I think it's, if you're looking for a mentor too, look to your alumni associations at schools, look to the AIA. A lot of local chapters can put you in touch with people.
That's great advice. The next question is from Nicole. Did any of you sit for your exam while being a parent?
Well, I was just telling this story. 27 years ago, last week, I had my son in Alexandria, Virginia, and I thought, oh great, I've got about 3 months I could study for the exam, and I went down to Richmond to take the exam, and I failed miserably. So having a newborn did not give me extra time, but I quickly learned that I had to juggle that. So
I actually finished before my son was born, so I maybe subconsciously made that decision that I wanted it done beforehand. I do have a colleague actually that tried to study for it. It was different format than it is now while she was on maternity leave, and she kind of used it as her like alone time to study because she figured at least if she could have those few hours. So I wouldn't say it's an easy process by any means, but I do have friends that have done it. It's motivated them sometimes even more because they know they have to get it done. It keeps you a little more organized.
So our next question is, what resources do you use to find comparable wages? One place to start would be the AIA compensation report, but I think you mentioned design intelligence.
I think that's the same thing as the AIA's compensation report. And I think, too, that I think Zweig White has got newsletters that also measures that sometimes. And I think, too, that there probably are some statewide documents that probably tell you that, too. Now, it may not be necessarily geared toward a specific profession.
I mean, for a question like that, we were saying earlier, I couldn't tell you what anybody else I've worked with, what their salary is. It's just, it's kind of like a hush-hush thing that nobody talks about. But one suggestion would be actually if you have a colleague or a boss or something, a previous boss or somebody at a different firm, perhaps they'd be willing to honestly evaluate you and tell you what they think you should be asking for, just to get another gauge, because it's kind of it's almost like a situation where it's not like you're applying there for a job, so they can be maybe a little more blunt.
It could be a good question for your mentor.
Right, exactly.
If they're not in your office.
Yes, perfect question.
Okay. Monica would like to know, have you encountered any negative pushback when trying to define personal time for work-life balance?
Well, I think I think it's really important to find a work-life balance. I don't think I've ever received any negative feedback from anybody. I think the thing about architecture is that you have a responsibility to do a portion of a project. And typically, the more advanced you become in your career, if you're managing the project, really those expectations are really put upon yourself. Everybody has a role on a project, and you're working with a team. Either if you're working on a small project, you have all the responsibility, or if you're working with a team, it's really, you can't really let your team down. And so it is difficult finding work-life balance, but I think that, I think you were talking about having 2 days a week that you had made sort of a commitment. I know myself, I started running a number of years ago, and I've, now run like 12 half marathons and five marathons, and, I've made that a priority in my life. It takes a big commitment, but, I carve away 2 days a week, and I say during the week, I'm going to leave at a certain time. And I do that every week. And so it becomes a consistent, element within the week, and so I know that I'm going to have to come in an hour early that day, or maybe I have to work through lunch in order to get the work done. And I think what you'll find most is that there won't. At least I have not found criticism from others. It's really just criticism of myself on my work, and not wanting to let my team down.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're our own worst negativity. Do we feel guilty that we're not there, that we're actually asking for, for time for ourselves, and probably our worst judge of that.
And I think it's important to remember too that, depending on the work environment and the work culture, everybody has things going on in their personal life. Whether it's a child or running a marathon or going to the gym or, going and singing in a choir or somewhere. There's a million things, and you really don't know what everybody else is doing in their off hours. And so, you may see somebody leave at 3 o'clock during the day, but did you know that they showed up at 5:30 that morning to do work? So I think it's hard too, because you only see what's right in front of you. So I think especially at a new job, if you're starting, it's very easy to kind of set up those boundaries. When you've been working 60 hours a week for 2 years at a firm, all of a sudden leaving at 4 o'clock may turn up a few eyebrows, but I think if you have that conversation with your immediate supervisor or your manager and just explain, this is how I want to arrange it, I think that, most places will be accommodating.
Yeah, I think as long as you can get the job done that you're required to do, unless you're being, given unexpected amounts of work, but if you're getting your job done, I think that most people will be willing to listen to you, because they themselves have their own priorities in their life, and I think that they can relate to that.
Our next question is from Georgiana. Are any of you lead designers, and how many female lead designers do you work with?
Our firm made a requirement that all of us had to take the lead exam, and although there's a handful of us that actually do the documentation and on the project itself, we all try to design responsibly. Within our firm, I think that there's probably 20% of us that are women, so firm-wide, we've made that a priority.
Well, for clarification,
lead, L-E-A-D. I'm so sorry. We should have probably been spelling. Sorry.
Lead not as in the green certification, but as in,
a lead designer.
A leader.
How many are lead designers?
Well, I'm a director in a technical department, so I think that rules me out.
We do have a lot of designers in the firm that are leading projects, and I think that once again, as you've gained your experience and as you've gotten to that point and have the experience on that project type, you're going to be taking the lead on that.
Yeah, we have 5 female designers in our office right now, between licensed architects and interior designers. And I guess the way our office is set up, we're each responsible for our own projects. So I think it just depends on the size of the office and how the hierarchy and the structure is.
So how many are in your firm?
How many designers?
Total.
Oh, there's just 5 of us. So
Okay.
we all are managing our own project.
You're all female.
Mm-hmm, we're all female.
Okay. Our next question is from Sarah. Have any of you ever experienced discrimination between women in the workplace where you're trying to make it in a male-dominated field?
I think I said earlier, if I did, then I just didn't notice it. I feel like to this point, I don't know that I've experienced just direct discrimination. But if you are, I think that that's something you take to your human resources person, somebody who, or your somebody that's your supervisor or the principal in your firm, because I think that if you sense that, then that's pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, I've never experienced it within my own workplace, with the exception of, being on site. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. I think, in my early years out on a construction site, I definitely felt some hesitancy being out there and, reflecting back later on when I got onto my next job, trying to figure out ways that I could perfect, what had happened in my experience. Again, I really contributed it back to just sort of being, a little bit young, not having the experience, not having the exposure. So I wouldn't say it was discrimination, but more just not lack of experience.
A final question before we wrap up comes from Heather. Do you think the glass ceiling for women still exists in large firms?
Well, I would like to say no. I was recently appointed to director about a year and a half ago at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in the technical department. And, I definitely think in large firms, there has been, a struggle, and the numbers don't, if we look at the numbers in colleges and they're saying they're 50%, but that doesn't necessarily register to women in, high-ranking positions in large corporate firms. I've been at the same place for a number of years, and I'm glad to say that, I'm not sitting at the table alone anymore, that there are a great number of women that are being recognized. We have a woman partner in our office. And so I'd like to believe that there really aren't any glass ceilings. And I think that, you need to go into a job with that in mind and, keep that in your mind and say, if you believe that there are, you'll set yourself up to fail. And so throughout my entire profession, I always believed that I could do anything that I wanted to do. I always asked for every project that I wanted to work on. And, I prepared myself, I worked hard, and ultimately, was acknowledged for that hard work. And so I'd like to believe that they don't exist. And I think that I also represent the fact that they don't. And, all of us here.
Absolutely.
Okay. Could each of you share one key takeaway from today's discussion? Christine, can we start with you?
Sure. I think the one key takeaway and I've really enjoyed this discussion with you all, is that our profession is very different from a lot of professions. It takes a lot of time. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You have to define your boundaries and your personal boundaries so that you do have time outside of the workplace. And just, don't let things linger. Talk to your colleagues or find a mentor so that you can kind of steer your way through your career and do a lot of research.
I would say that, to establish what your path is, that, really you're ultimately in control of your path as an architect and as a professional. And if something's not working for you in a particular firm, or you're just starting to feel stagnant, you just need to maybe potentially look at that and maybe move on, because ultimately, you're in charge of your own path.
I think that's great advice, actually, and I think, we didn't touch on this too much, but I think, the generations that are coming out of school now, or maybe I would say 10 years or less out of school, we're a lot more inclined to jump around a little bit because, we do have this path with IGP and getting our license that we need to follow. And if, I'm a good example of this. If a firm is not, willing to let you get your IDP hours or support you through this process, maybe it's not the place that you want to be at. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with that firm. It's just, the path that you have set for yourself is not being fulfilled, maybe in a timely fashion. And then, not to sound so cliche, but, dress for the job that you want, not the one that you necessarily have. And if you have aspirations of being, the director of a firm or a principal, or, take initiative and, kind of set out your 5-year path, your 10-year path, and what will help you get there. Is it this mentor that you need to bring in to help you along the way? Or so I think everybody kind of takes their their career in their own hands.
Mm-hmm.
And get licensed.
Yeah, get lost.
Very important.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences and your advice, and thank you for joining us and for submitting your questions. Check back in to the NCARB blog next week to see a video recap of today's webinar. Thanks.